Hello, welcome to the reading room, episode 3. This is actually the June episode, but just didn't have any time in June. Like, that is to say, evenings that lined up with being able to sit down in front of the thing, and be awake and do all the stuff. I'm eating orange, sorry. I'll give a couple of minutes before I start reading for people to, anyone who is around to come in. I'm going to be reading Gene Wolfe today. I'm going to be reading The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories from the collection, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories and Other Stories. I may, because it's not a super long story, it's 15 pages in this, which might be like 40 minutes. It can be hard to tell. I think I found that with the Conan story, which was the first episode, where just it took longer to read, much longer to read than to read simply the pages. I'm revising my estimates down, but if there's space and time, I might read a story called La Befana as well, which is quite a short one. What I thought I would do first, I hadn't gone and got the books, but I thought I would just give an update on what I've been reading in June, what I read in June, because I don't do reading vlogs. I think I found that though they got a certain kind of steady engagement, like people would go and watch them, my regulars would watch them and would talk. It wasn't something I massively enjoyed making on its own, because you're having to sit down, you're having to do it separately, you're having to upload it, potentially make a thumbnail, etc. And I think I didn't massively enjoy that, and it wasn't like I was like, it was good to talk to my regulars, but I was talking to them on other videos anyway, so it wasn't adding something to my experience of running a channel, which is a kind of different vector or different axis to measure. But I think what I found was so I stopped doing that, but I've been reading. I've finished only a few fiction books. I actually do have a list here. I will quickly. I finished The LA Quartet number 3, LA Confidential, with inspiration for the great film by Curtis Hanson, which I loved the film. I read the first 2 LA Quartet books by James Elroy last year. Read the third one this past month. It was great. It's certainly not for the faint of heart. When I read the 4th one, I'll put up a review of the whole quartet. But they are pretty tough books, pretty violent books, pretty graphic books. Penrick Collection number 3, Penrick's Labours. So 3 more Penrick novellas in the World of Five Gods by Lois McMaster Bujold. I think I'm going to do a review of the whole Penrick series in the next couple of days. The whole Penrick series I've read, the 3 collections. There's a novel and a novella I have not read because there's no hard copy of them. I'm really up for the novel. It's her first novel in a couple of years, since like 2018 or something, actually. I think something like that. 2019 maybe. And then Peace by Gene Wolfe on the Righteous Night, which Peace was incredible. I don't think it's his best work, but I was tempted to feel like it was his best work. I thought it was a great book. It was very powerful, emotionally powerful, very kind of labyrinthine in terms of things going on in it. I really enjoyed Peace, and I'd recommend it. I think I talked about this with channel regular and stream regular Matthew Groves about who'd recommend it to as a first book, because it's shortish, 300 pages. It's not short, but it's shortish, and it's relatively approachable in terms of some of the central mysteries are fairly upfront, and other things are more complex, but that's fine. But I think the kind of thing that Wolfe's doing is in some ways less obvious and less approachable than in other ones of his more famous novels. Book of the New Sun, Wizard Knight and Sorcerer's House are later works by him that get recommended as a first place to go. Fifth Head of Cerberus is an early place. Peace is in many ways not too hard, but is perhaps just a bit more dense and intense for a first timer. But that's what I read fiction wise in June, and I enjoyed. I was happy with that. I didn't read as much. I also finished the second Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling with my kids, which was good. Really enjoyed that as well. Actually, that was surprisingly serious. Well, first and second Jungle Books both surprisingly serious, and I recommend them to people who like the film but want to know what they're based on, or maybe more generally people who are interested in kind of powerful fable type stories. What I will do now, that's my drink now. It's in the wrong place. I will just start reading The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. I think the collection. The collection was called The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories for some sort of weird reason, like a bit like how he ended up calling his book about writing Castle of the Otter, because someone, not knowing what the name of the fourth book of the Book of the New Sun was fairly sure it was called Castle of the Otter. It is, of course, called Citadel of the Autarch. But yeah, this was something like, I think someone had assumed The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. Recently, they'd assumed it was a collection, and so he thought that's fun. It was the first of his. It was 1970. I think it is often seen as the story which is his emergence on the scene of like being a great writer. It's his first classic, people often say. I would say that's something. 1970 to 2021 or whenever the posthumous book was published, Interlibrary Loan. 51 years. That's a long career of stuff that sort of from that 1970 point, he had stories before that, all the way to, if not the last couple of books, though they are well rated, certainly into the 2010s, writing stuff people think is great. That is an incredibly long peak career, over 40 years. When you realize someone like Bradbury, or even something like Philip K. Dick, you have a few writers who really have 10 or 15-year peaks where basically everything worth reading by them is written. Bradbury didn't write much in the last 30 years of his life, or so 35 years of his life. So certainly I would recommend this collection. It also includes three of the archipelago stories, which are all twists on the name. So there's The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. There's The Death of Dr. Island and The Doctor of Death Island. There's also another one which was in a limited edition chapbook of the archipelago stories. So I do recommend this collection. I think it's print on demand on Amazon. I got this, so you can probably get it in most countries on Amazon print on demand. The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories by Gene Wolfe. Winter comes to water as well as land, though there are no leaves to fall. The waves that were a bright, hard blue yesterday under a fading sky today are green, opaque and cold. If you are a boy, not wanted in the house, you walk the beach for hours, feeling the winter that has come in the night. Sand blowing across your shoes, spray wetting the legs of your corduroys. You turn your back to the sea, and with the sharp end of a stick found half buried right in the wet sand, Tackman Babcock. Then you go home, knowing that behind you the Atlantic is destroying your work. Home is the big house on Settlers Island, but Settlers Island, so called, is not really an island, and for that reason is not named or accurately delineated on maps. Smash a barnacle with a stone, and you'll see inside the shape from which the beautiful barnacle goose takes its name. There is a thin, flaccid organ which is the goose's neck and the mollusk's siphon, and a shapeless body with tiny wings. Settlers Island is like that. The gooseneck is a strip of land down which a county road runs. By whim, the map makers usually exaggerate the width of this and give no information to indicate that it is scarcely above the half tide. Thus, Settlers Island appears to be a mere protuberance on the coast, not requiring a name, and since the village of 10 or 8 houses has none, nothing shows on the map but the spine of road terminating at the sea. The village has no name, but home has two, a near and a far designation. On the island and on the mainland nearby, it's called the Seaview Place, because in the earliest years of the century it was operated as a resort hotel. Mama calls it the House of 31 February, and that is on her stationery and is presumably used by her friends in New York and Philadelphia when they do not simply say Mrs. Babcock's. Home is 4 floors high in some places, less in others, and is completely surrounded by a veranda. It was once painted yellow, but the paint outside is mostly gone now, and the House of 31 February is grey. Jason comes out the front door with little curly hairs and his chin trembling in the wind, and his thumbs hooked in the waistband of his Levi's. Come on, you're going into town with me. Your mother wants to rest. Hey, tough, in Jason's Jaguar. Feeling the leather upholstery soft and smelly, you fall asleep. Awake in town, bright lights flashing in the car windows. Jason is gone and the car is growing cold. You wait for what seems a long time, looking out at the shop windows, the big gun on the hip of the policeman who walks past, the lost dog, who is afraid of everyone, even when you tap the glass and call to him. Then Jason is back with packages to put behind the seats. Are we going home now? He nods without looking at you, arranging his bundles so they won't topple over, fastening his seatbelt. I want to get out of the car. He looks at you. I want to go in a store. Come on, Jason. Jason sighs. All right, the drugstore over there, okay? Just for a minute. The drugstore is as big as a supermarket with long, bright aisles of glassware and notions and paper goods. Jason buys fluid for his lighter at the cigarette counter, and you bring him a book from a revolving wire rack. Please, Jason. He takes it from you and replaces it on the rack. Then when you're in the car again, takes it from under his jacket and gives it to you. It is a wonderful book, thick and heavy, with the edges of the pages tinted yellow. The covers are glossy, stiff cardboard, and on the front is a picture of a man in rags fighting a thing partly like an ape and partly like a man, but much worse than either. The picture is in colour, and there's real blood on the ape thing. The man is muscular and handsome, with tawny hair lighter than Jason's, and no beard. You like that? You're out of town already, and without the streetlights, it's too dark in the car almost to see the picture. You nod. Jason laughs. That's camp. Did you know that? You shrug, riffling the pages under your thumb, thinking of reading alone in your room tonight. You going to tell your mum how nice I was to you? Sure. You want me to? Tomorrow, not tonight. I think she'll be asleep when we get back. Don't you wake her up. Jason's voice says he'll be angry if you do. Okay. Don't come in her room. Okay. The Jaguar says down the road, and you can see the white caps in the moonlight now, and the driftwood pushed just off the asphalt. You got a nice soft mummy, you know that? When I climb in her, it's just like being on a big pillow. You nod, remembering the times when, lonely and frightened by dreams, you have crawled into her bed and snuggled against her soft warmth. But at the same time, angry, knowing Jason is somehow deriding you both. Home is silent and dark, and you leave Jason as soon as you can, bounding off down the hall, up the stairs ahead of him, up a second narrow twisted flight to your own room in the turret. I had this story from a man who was breaking his word in telling it. How much he has suffered in his hands, I should say, in his mouth, rather, I cannot say. In essentials, it is true, and I give it to you as it was given to me. This is the story he told. Captain Philip Ransom had been adrift alone for 9 days when he saw the island. It was already late evening when it appeared like a thin line of purple on the horizon. But Ransom did not sleep that night. There was no feeble questioning in his wakeful mind concerning the reality of what he had seen. He had been given that one glimpse, and he knew. Instead, his brain teemed with facts and speculations. He knew he must be somewhere near New Guinea, and he reviewed mentally what he knew of the currents in those waters and what he had learned in the past 9 days of the behaviour of his raft. The island, when he reached it, he did not allow himself to would, in all probability, be solid jungle a few feet back from the water's edge. That night, or there might or might not be natives, but he brought to mind all he could of the bizarre Malay and Tagalog he had acquired in his years as a pilot, as a plantation manager, white hunter, and professional fighting man in the Pacific. In the morning, he saw that purple shadow on the horizon again, a little nearer this time, and almost precisely where his mental calculations had told him to expect it. For 9 days, there had been no reason to employ the inadequate paddles provided with the raft, but now he had something to row for. Ransom drank the last of his water and began stroking with a steady and powerful beat which was not interrupted until the prow of his rubber craft ground into beach sand. Morning. You are slowly awake. Your eyes feel gummy, and the light over your bed is still on. Downstairs there is no one. So you get a bowl and milk and puffed sugary cereal out for yourself and light the oven with a kitchen match so you can eat and read by its open door. When the cereal is gone, you drink the sweet milk and crumbs in the bottom of the bowl and start a pot of coffee, knowing it will please Mother. Jason comes down, dressed but not wanting to talk, drinks coffee and makes one piece of cinnamon toast in the oven. You listen to him leave, the stretched buzzing of his car on the road, then go up to Mother's room. She is awake, her eyes open, looking at the ceiling, but you know she isn't ready to get up yet. Very politely, because that minimizes the chances of being shouted at, you say, "How are you feeling this morning, Mama?" She rolls her head to look. Strung out. "What time is it, Tacky?" You look at the little folding clock on her dresser. 17 minutes after 8. Jason, go. "Yes, just now, Mama." She is looking at the ceiling again. "You go back downstairs now, Tacky. I'll get you something when I feel better." Downstairs, you put on your sheepskin coat and go out on the veranda to look at the sea. There are gulls riding the icy wind, and very far off, something orange bobbing in the waves, always closer. A little raft. You run to the beach, jump up and down and wave your cap. "Over here! Over here!" The man from the raft has no shirt, but the cold doesn't seem to bother him. Hello, Matthew. Welcome. Yeah, we've obviously read this before together. The man from the raft has no shirt, but the cold doesn't seem to bother him. He holds out his hand and says, "Captain Ransom," and you take it and are suddenly taller and older. Not as tall as he is or as old as he is, but taller and older than yourself. "Tackman Babcock, Captain. Pleased to meet you. You were a friend in need there a minute ago. I guess I didn't do anything but welcome you here ashore. The sound of your voice gave me something to steer for while my eyes were too busy watching that surf. Now you can tell me where I've landed and who you are." You're walking back up to the house now, and you explain to Ransom about you and your mother and how she doesn't want to enroll you in the school here because she's trying to get you into the private school your father went to once. And after a time, there is nothing more to say, and you show Ransom one of the empty rooms on the 3rd floor where he can rest and do whatever he wants. Then you go back to your own room to read. "Do you mean that you made these monsters?" "Made them?" Dr. Death leaned forward, a cruel smile playing about his lips. "Did God make Eve, Captain, when he took her from Adam's rib, or did Adam make the bone and God alter it to become what he wished? Look at it this way, Captain. I am God, and nature is Adam." Ransom looked at the thing who grasped his right arm with hands that might have circled a utility pole as easily. "Do you mean that this thing is an animal?" "Not an animal," the monster said, wrenching his arm cruelly. "Man." Dr. Death's smile broadened. "Yes, Captain, man. The question is, what are you? When I'm finished with you, we'll see. Dulling your mind will be less of a problem than upgrading these poor brutes. But what about increasing the efficacy of your sense of smell? Not to mention rendering it impossible for you to walk erect." "Not to walk all four on ground," the beastman holding Ransom muttered. "That is the law." Dr. Death turned and called to the shambling hunchback Ransom had seen earlier. "Golo, see to it that Captain Ransom is securely put away, then prepare the surgery." A car. Not Jason's noisy Jaguar, but a quiet, large-sounding car. By heaving up the narrow, tight little window at the corner of the turret and sticking your head out into the cold wind, you can see it. Dr. Black's big one, with the roof and hood all shiny with new wax. Downstairs, Dr. Black is hanging up an overcoat with a collar of fur, and you smell the old cigar smoke in his clothing before you see him. Then Aunt May and Aunt Julie are there to keep you occupied, so he won't be reminded too vividly that marrying Mama means getting you as well. They talk to you. "How have you been, Tacky? What do you find to do out here all day?" "Nothing." "Nothing? Did you ever go looking for shells on the beach?" "I guess so." "You're a handsome boy, do you know that?" Aunt May touches your nose with a scarlet-tipped finger and holds it there. Aunt May is Mother's sister, but older and not as pretty. Aunt Julie is Papa's sister, a tall lady with a pulled-out, unhappy face, and makes you think of him even when you know she only wants Mama to get married again so that Papa won't have to send her any more money. Mama herself is downstairs now, in a clean new dress with long sleeves. She laughs at Dr. Black's jokes and holds onto his arm, and you think how nice her hair looks, and you will tell her so when you are alone. Dr. Black says, "How about it, Barbara? Are you ready for the party?" And Mother, "Heavens, no. You know what the place is like. Yesterday I spent all day cleaning, and today you can't even see what I did, but Julie and May will help me." Dr. Black laughs. "After lunch." You get into his big car with the others and go to a restaurant on the edge of a cliff with a picture window to see the ocean. Dr. Black orders a sandwich for you that has turkey and bacon and 3 pieces of bread, but you're finished before the grown-ups have started. And when you try to talk to Mother, Aunt May sends you out where there is a railing with wire to fill in the spaces like chicken wire, only heavier, to look at the view. It is really not much higher than the top window at home, maybe a little higher. You put the toes of your shoes in the wire and bend out with your stomach against the rail to look down, but a grown-up pulls you down and tells you not to do it, then goes away. You do it again, and there are rocks at the bottom which the waves wash over in a neat way, covering them up and then pulling back. Someone touches your elbow, but you pay no attention for a minute, watching the water. Then you get down, and the man standing beside you is Dr. Death. He has a white scarf and black leather gloves, and his hair is shiny black. His face is not tanned like Captain Ransom's, but white and handsome in a different way, like the statue of a head that used to be in Papa's library when you and Mother used to live in town with him. And you think Mum would say after he's gone how good looking he was. He smiles at you, but you are no older. Hi. What else can you say? Good afternoon, Mr. Babcock. I'm afraid I startled you. You shrug a little bit. I didn't expect you to be here, I guess. Dr. Death turns his back to the wind to light a cigarette he takes from a gold case. It is longer even than a 101 and has a red tip and a gold dragon on the paper. While you were looking down, I slipped from between the pages of the excellent novel you have in your coat pocket. I didn't know you could do that. Oh, yes, I'll be around from time to time. Captain Ransom is here already. He'll kill you. Dr. Death smiles and shakes his head. Hardly. You see, Tackman, Ransom and I are a bit like wrestlers. Under various guises, we put on our show again and again, but only under the spotlight. He flicks his cigarette over the rail, and for a moment your eyes follow the bright spark out and down and see it vanish in the water. When you look back, Dr. Death is gone and you are getting cold. You go back into the restaurant and get a free mint candy where the cash register is, and then go sit beside Aunt May again in time to have coconut cream pie and hot chocolate. Aunt May drops out of the conversation long enough to ask, "Who's the man you're talking to, Tacky?" "A man." In the car, Mama sits close to Dr. Black and Aunt Julie on the other side of her, so she'll have to, and Aunt May sits way up on the edge of her seat with her head in between theirs so they can all talk. It is grey and cold outside. You think of how long it will be before you are home again and take the book out. Ransom heard them coming and flattened himself against the wall beside the door of his cell. There was no way out, he knew, save through the iron portal. For the past 4 hours he'd been testing every surface of the stone room for a possible exit, and there was none. Floor, walls, and ceiling were of cyclopean stone blocks. The windowless door of solid metal locked outside. Nearer. He tensed every muscle and knotted his fists. Nearer. The shambling steps halted. There was a rattle of keys, and the door swung back. Like a thunderbolt of purpose, he dove through the opening. A hideous face loomed above him, and he sent his right fist crashing into it, knocking the lumbering beast-man to his knees. 2 hairy arms pinioned him from behind, but he fought free, and the monster reeled under his blows. The corridor stretched ahead of him with a dim glow of daylight at the end, and he sprinted for it. Then darkness. When he recovered consciousness, he found himself already erect, strapped to the wall of a brilliantly lit room which seemed to share the characters of a surgical theatre and a chemical laboratory. Directly before his eyes stood a bulky object which he knew must be an operating table, and upon it, covered with the sheet, lay the unmistakable form of a human being. He'd hardly had time to comprehend the situation when Dr. Death entered, no longer in the elegant evening dress in which Ransom had beheld him last, but wearing white surgical clothing. Behind him limped the hideous Golo, carrying a tray of implements. "Ah!" Seeing that his prisoner was conscious, Dr. Death strolled across the room and raised a hand as though to strike him in the face, but when Ransom did not flinch, dropped it smiling. "My dear Captain, you're with us again, I see." "I hoped for a minute then," Ransom said levelly, "that I was away from you. Mind telling me what got me?" "A thrown cover club, or so my slaves report. My baboon man is quite good at it. But aren't you going to ask about this charming little tableau I've staged for you?" "I would give you the pleasure. But you are curious." Dr. Death smiled his crooked smile. "I shall not keep you in suspense. Your own time, Captain, has not come yet, and before it does, I'm going to demonstrate my technique to you. And so seldom I have a really appreciative audience. With a calculated gesture, he whipped away the sheet which had covered the prone form on the operating table. Ransom could hardly believe his eyes. Before him lay the unconscious body of a girl with skin as white as milk and hair like the sun seen through mist. You are interested now, I see, Dr. Death remarked dryly, and you consider her beautiful. Believe me, when I've completed my work, you'll flee screaming if she so much as turns what will no longer be a face toward you. This woman has been my implacable enemy since I came to this island, and the time has come for me to... He halted in mid-sentence and looked at Ransom with an expression of mingled slyness and gloating. For me to illustrate something of your own fate, shall we say? While Dr. Death had been talking, his deformed assistant had prepared a hypodermic needle. Ransom watched as the needle plunged into the girl's almost translucent flesh, and the liquid in the syringe, a fluid which by its very colour suggested the vile perversion of medical technique, entered her bloodstream. Though still unconscious, the girl sighed, and it seemed to Ransom that a cloud passed over her sleeping face as though she had already begun an evil dream. Roughly, the hideous Golo turned her on her back and fastened in place straps of the same kind as those that held Ransom himself pinned to the wall. "What are you reading, Tacky?" Aunt May asked. "Nothing." He shut the book. "Well, you shouldn't read in the car. It's bad for your eyes." Dr. Black looked back at them for a moment, then asked Mama, "Have you got a costume for the little fellow yet?" "For Tacky?" Mama shook her head, making her beautiful hair shine even in the dim light of the car. "No, nothing. It'll be past his bedtime." "Well, you'll have to let him see the guests anyway, Barbara. No boy should miss that." And then the car was racing along the road out to Settlers Island. And then you were home. Ransom watched as the loathsome creature edged towards him. Though not as large as some of the others, its great teeth looked formidable indeed, and in one hand it grasped a heavy jungle knife with a razor edge. For a moment he thought it would molest the unconscious girl, but it circled around her to stand before Ransom herself, never meeting his eyes. Then, with a gesture as unexpected as it was frightening, it bent suddenly to press its hideous face against his pinioned right hand, and a great shuddering gasp ran through the creature's twisted body. Ransom waited, tense. Again that deep inhalation, seeming almost a sob. Then the beast-man straightened up, looking into Ransom's face, but avoiding his gaze. A thin, strangely familiar whine came from the monster's throat. "Cut me loose," Ransom ordered. "Yes, this I came to. Yes, master." The huge head, wider than it was high, bobbed up and down. Then the sharp blade of the machete bit into the straps holding Ransom. As soon as he was free, he took the blade from the willing hand of the beast-man and freed the limbs of the girl on the operating table. She was light in his arms, and for an instant he stood looking down at her tranquil face. "Come, master." The beast-man pulled at his sleeve. "Bruno knows a way out. Follow Bruno." A hidden flight of steps led to a long and narrow corridor, almost pitch dark. "No one use this way," the beast-man said in his harsh voice. "They not find us here." "Why did you free me?" Ransom asked. There was a pause. Then, almost with an air of shame, the great twisted form replied, "You smell good, and Bruno does not like Dr. Death." Ransom's conjectures were confirmed. Gently he asked, "You were a dog before Dr. Death worked on you, weren't you, Bruno?" "Yes." The beastman's voice held a sort of pride. "A St. Bernard. I've seen pictures." Dr. Death should have known better than to employ his foul skills on such a noble animal. Ransom reflected aloud. Dogs are too shrewd in judging character, but then the evil are always foolish in the final analysis. Unexpectedly, the dogman halted in front of him, forcing Ransom to stop too. For a moment, the massive head bent over the unconscious girl. Then there was a barely audible growl. "You say, master, that I can judge. Then I tell you, Bruno does not like this female Dr. Death calls Tala of the Long Eyes." You put the open book face down on the pillow and jump up, hugging yourself and skipping bare heels around the room. "Marvelous, wonderful. But no more reading tonight. Save it, save it. Turn the light off." And then in the delicious dark, put the book reverently away under the bed, pushing aside pieces of the Tinker Toy set and the box with the filling station game cards. "Tomorrow there will be more, and you can hardly wait for tomorrow. You lie on your back, hands under head, covers up to chin, and when you close your eyes, you can see it all, the island, with jungle trees swaying in the sea wind. Dr. Death's castle lifting its big, cold greyness against the hot day. The whole house is still, only the wind and the Atlantic are out, the familiar sounds. Downstairs, Mother is talking to Aunt May and Aunt Julie, and you listen, and you fall asleep. You are awake. Listen. Late, it's very late, a strange time you've almost forgotten. Listen. So quiet it hurts. Something. Listen. On the steps. You get out of bed and find your flashlight, not because you are brave, but because you cannot wait there in the dark. There is nothing in the narrow, cold little stairwell outside your door. Nothing in the big hallway of the second floor. You shine your light quickly from end to end. Aunt Julie is breathing through her nose, but there is nothing frightening about that sound. You know what it is, only Aunt Julie, asleep, breathing loud through her nose. Nothing on the stairs coming up. You go back to your room, turn off your flashlight, and get into bed. When you're almost sleeping, there is the scrabbling sound of hard claws on the floorboards and a rough tongue touching your fingertips. Don't be afraid, Master. It is only Bruno, and you feel him warm with his own warm and smelling of his own smell, lying beside your own bed. Then it is morning. The bedroom is cold, and there is no one in it but yourself. You go into the bathroom where there is a thing like a fan, but with hot electric wires to dress. Downstairs, Mother is up already with a cloth thing tied over her hair, and so are Aunt May and Aunt Julie sitting at the table with coffee and milk and big slices of fried ham. Aunt Julie says, "Hello, Tacky," and Mother smiles at you. There is a plate out for you already, and you have ham and toast. All day the three women are cleaning and putting up decorations. Red and gold paper masks Aunt Julie made to hang on the wall, and funny lights that change colour and go round, and you try to stay out of the way and bring in wood for a fire in the big fireplace that almost never gets used. Jason comes, and Aunt May and Aunt Julie don't like him, but he helps some and goes into town with his car for things he forgot to buy before. He won't take you this time. The word comes in around the window, but they let you alone in the room. The wind comes in around the window, but they let you alone in your room, and it's even quiet up there because they're all downstairs. Ransom looked at the enigmatic girl incredulously. "You do not believe me," she said. It was a simple statement of fact without anger or accusation. "You'll have to admit it's pretty hard to believe," he temporized. "A city older than civilization, buried in the jungle here on the little island." Talar said tonelessly, "When you were as he," she pointed at the dogman, "is now. When you were as he," she pointed at the dogman, "is now. Lemuria was queen of the sea. All that is gone, except my city, is not that enough to satisfy even time?" Bruno plucked at Ransom's sleeve. "Do not go, Master. Beastmen go sometimes. Beastmen Dr. Death does not want. If you come back, they were very evil at that place." "You see?" A slight smile played about Talar's ripe lips. "Even your slave testifies for me. My city exists." "How far?" Ransom asked curtly. "Perhaps half a day's travel through the jungle." The girl paused, as though afraid to say more. "What is it?" Ransom asked. "You'll lead us against Dr. Death. We wish to cleanse this island, which is our home." "Sure, I don't like him any more than your people do, maybe less." "Even if you do not like my people, you will lead them?" "If they'll have me, but you're hiding something. What is it?" "You see me, and I might be a woman of your own people. Is that not so?" They were moving through the jungle again now, the dogman reluctantly acting as rear guard. "Very few girls of my people are as beautiful as you are, but otherwise, yes. And for that reason I am high priestess to my people. For in me the ancient blood runs pure and sweet, but it is not so with all." Her voice sunk to a whisper. "When a tree is very old and yet still lives, sometimes the limbs are strangely twisted. Do you understand?" Tacky, are you in there?" "Uh-huh." You put the book inside your sweater. "Well, come and open the door. Little boys ought not to lock their doors. Don't you want to see the company?" You open, and Aunt May's a gypsy with long hair that isn't hers around her face, and a mask that is only at her eyes. Downstairs, cars are stopping in front of the house, and Mother is standing at the front door, dressed in day-glow robes that open way down the front but cover her arms almost to the end of her fingers. She is talking to everyone as they come in, and you see her eyes are bright and strange the way they are sometimes when she dances by herself and talks when no one is listening. A woman with a fish for a head and a shiny silver dress is Aunt Julie. A doctor with a doctor's coat and listening things and a shiny thing on his head to look through is Dr. Black. And a soldier in a black uniform with a pirate thing on his hat and a whip is Jason. The big table has a punch bowl and cakes and little sandwiches and hot bean dip. You pull away when the gypsy is talking to someone and take some cakes and sit under the table watching legs. There is music. Some of the legs dance and you stay under there a long time. Then a man's and a girl's legs dance close to the table and there is suddenly a laughing face in front of you. Captain Ransom's. What are you doing under there, Tack? Come out and join the party. And you crawl out, feeling very small instead of older, but older when you stand up. Captain Ransom is dressed like a castaway in a ragged shirt and pants torn off at the knees, but all clean and starched. His love beads are seeds and seashells, and he has his arm around a girl with no clothes at all, just jewellery. Tack, this is Talar of the Long Eyes. You smile and bow and kiss her hand, and are nearly as tall as she. All around, people are dancing or talking, and no one seems to notice you. With Captain Ransom on one side of Talar and you on the other, you thread your way through the room, avoiding the dancers and the little groups of people with drinks. In the room you and Mother use as a living room when there's no company. 2 men and 2 girls are making love with the television on, and in the little room past that a girl is sitting on the floor with her back to the wall and men are standing in corners. Hello, the girl says. Hello to you all. She's the first one to have noticed you when you stop. Hello. I'm going to pretend you're real. Do you mind? No. You look around for Ransom and Talar, but they are gone and you think they're probably in the living room kissing with the others. This is my 3rd trip. Not a good trip, but not a bad trip. But I should have had a monitor, someone to stay with me. Who are these men? The men in the corners stir and you can hear the clinking of their armour and see light glinting on it, and you look away. I think they're from the city. They probably came to watch out for Talar, and somehow you know that this is the truth. Make them come out where I can see them. Before you can answer, Dr. Death says, I don't really think you'd want to, and you turn and find him standing just behind you wearing full evening dress and a cloak. He takes your arm. Come on, Tacky. There's something I think you should see. You follow him to the back stairs and then up and along the hall to the door of Mother's room. Mother is inside on the bed, and Dr. Black is standing over her filling a hypodermic. As you watch, he pushes up her sleeve so that all the other injection marks show ugly and red on her arm, and all you can think of is Dr. Death bending over Talar on the operating table. You run downstairs looking for Ransom, but he's gone and there's nobody at the party at all except the real people, and in the cold shadows of the back stoop, Dr. Death's assistant, Golo, who will not speak but only stares you in the moonlight with pale eyes. The next house down the beach belongs to a woman you have seen sometimes cutting down the dry fall remnant of her asparagus or hilling up her roses while you played. You pound at her door and try to explain, and after a while, she calls the police. Across the sky, the flames were licking at the roof timbers now. Ransom made a megaphone of his hands and shouted, Give up! You'll all be burned to death if you stay in there. But the only reply was a shot, and he was not certain they had heard him. The Lemurian bowman discharged another flight of arrows at the windows. Talar grasped his arm. Come back before they kill you. Numbly, he retreated with her, stepping across the massive body of the bullman, which lay pierced by 20 or more shafts. You fold back the corner of a page and put the book down. The waiting room is cold and bare, and although sometimes the people hurrying through smile at you, you feel lonely. After a long time, a big man with grey hair and a woman with a blue uniform want to talk to you. The woman's voice is friendly, but only the way teachers' voices are sometimes. I bet you're sleepy, Tackman. Can you talk to us a little while before you go to bed? Yes, the grey-haired man says. Do you know who gave your mother drugs? I don't know. Dr. Black was going to do something to her. He waves that aside. Not that, medicine. Your mother took a lot of medicine. Who gave it to her? Jason? I don't know. The woman says, Your mother is going to be well, Tackman, but it will be for a while. Do you understand? For now, you're going to have to live for a while in a big house with some other boys. All right. The man. Amphetamines. Does that mean anything to you? Did you ever hear that word? You shake your head. The woman. Dr. Black was only trying to help your mother, Tackman. I know you don't understand, but she used several medicines at once, mixed them, and then that can be very bad. They go away, and you pick up the book and riffle the pages, but you do not read. At your elbow, Dr. Death says, What's the matter, Tacky? He smells of scorched cloth, and there is a streak of blood across his forehead, but he smiles and lights one of his cigarettes. You hold up the book. I don't want it to end. You'll be killed at the end. And you don't want to lose me. That's touching. You will, won't you? You'll burn up in the fire, and Captain Ransom will go away and leave Talar. Dr. Death smiles. But if you start the book again, we'll all be back, even Golo and the Bullman. Honest? Certainly. He stands up and tousles your hair. It's the same with you, Tacky. You're too young to realize it, yep, but it's the same with you. The end. It's an odd story, isn't it? It's there's a few things. I mean, one, it's obviously it has a second person perspective. It is not doing the same. You know, it might remind you of the fifth season by N.K. Jemisin. It's an odd device, but it's intentional. But I wonder why. You know, as it's plainly intentional. Yeah, I think it is adaptable. It's more adaptable than lots of Wolfe because of the way in which fiction bleeds into the real world, seemingly, and the fact that because the narrator is telling you that you see this. That's one thing where I guess part of the purpose of the second person perspective. You just see Captain Ransom or Dr. Death. I think you can get away with a fairly simple cast, basically, and a fairly simple visual presentation in a way that a risk with Book of the New Sun is either you lose the issue of, you know, what's so central to the book itself, i.e. the narrator's voice, Severian being an unreliable narrator, or you get absorbed into what would be very fun imagery, you know, like design and talking about the world and showing the world, whilst missing out the themes of the thing. I think that'd be a very obvious pitfall as well. Whereas here, I think it wouldn't make, it's only 14 pages or so. It wouldn't make, I think, an hour and a half film, but you could expand it. You could do more. I mean, certainly there's also stuff that you can add that could be quite fun if you're wanting to emphasize the nature of the pulps that obviously the Island of Dr. Death sub-story is based on. That is, of course, the book he has, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. That's what Jason steals for him. But yeah, so the second person perspective, one, it requires you to believe the things that you're seeing in a way a third person or a first person would both struggle to do. You see Dr. Death, you see Captain Ransom. I think there's an interesting thing in terms of, there's enough hints that there are a couple of very strange things going on to do with what these depictions are. So one is that Tackman, there is some interesting stuff about kind of the meaning of Tackman Babcock and whether or not these words are associated with trees and stuff like that. I read that in Mark Aramini's first book of essays on Gene Wolfe's work. But I think Tackman, you see these people, but sometimes they seem to just be a guy who takes you down from the fence at a restaurant, or people, Ransom and Talar, just seem to be people at the party, don't they? Golo is just sitting in a corner and doesn't do anything, you know. But who's the little girl as well? So on the other side, you've got the fictional people coming into the story, but is the little girl, I don't know, the soul of his mother? Is that what the idea of it being a bad trip is? Or is it someone from our reality reading the book? Apparently, in Shadows of the Wolf, whatever it's called, the stories written in tribute to Gene Wolfe during his lifetime, one of them does actually address that theme a little bit. I think this idea of, like, you know, that is these texts as themselves are. There's layered texts. We're reading the Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, the story, but then we are also reading the story, The Island of Dr. Death, though albeit only parts of it, small parts of it, that Tackman chooses to read, or rather that are notable enough for us to hear about in his reading of it. Yeah, I think there's a thing about the secondary realities that's going on that's weird and confusing. I think there's also an interesting thing about how to put it, about the identity of the people he's meeting in the fiction, but also what do they represent, and are they meant to be analogous at all to characters in his world? Is Dr. Death anything like Dr. Black? He thinks he's like him. They're both doctors. He has the image of Dr. Death over Talar equaling Dr. Black over Mama. except Dr. Black is obviously giving an adrenaline shot to bring Mama back from the cocktail of drugs she's taken, which may be provided by Jason on the trip that he refuses to take Tackman into town. Certainly Jason seems to know about the issue of drug use, hence stuff about her being asleep and stuff. And Jason is a shady guy. He is a bit shady and weird. He's a bit creepy. He steals a book for Tackman, but seemingly to impress Tackman's mother. And he dresses like a Nazi. He wears a soldier's uniform, but with the pirate thing, skull and crossbones, pretty much the Totenkopf of the SS. So Jason's a bad guy. Is he the drug dealer? It's not actually made clear. Like, could it be that Dr. Black is the drug dealer, but also has an adrenaline shot? It's possible, even if less likely. So yeah, there's the thing about, like, are the people real who come into the world, or are they just takeovers of people he's meeting in the world, like real people? But are they also the characters analogous in some way in Tackman's head to characters in his own life in the real world? Who's Talar? Does Talar represent his mother, if that's the case, and or the little girl who may also be his mother? Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one, isn't it, to pick through that, because he doesn't explicitly there's not a thing where people do exactly the same thing. You have the specific comparison of Dr. Black and Dr. Death, but beyond that, you don't have explicit comparisons. There are things you could continue to draw. Perhaps Talar talking about the degeneration of Lemuria connects to his beautiful mother, and who's quite sexualized as well, and being on this weird, decrepit island. Let's see. Yeah, there's certainly. It's not the only Wolfe story to play with this, is it? But it's and Peace actually does this a bit. Peace is written not long after this, of course, 5 or 6 years, but plays with the Wolfian childhood, or just before Wolfian childhood. I mean, it's similar to what Bradbury does with Dandelion Wine, I think, and Something Wicked This Way Comes, which Matthew has read in the slow burn buddy read on my Discord. But we'll be starting a new slow burn buddy read this week, actually, which is going to be The Doomed City by Boris and Arkady Strugatsky, a classic, very important sci-fi, considered they're famous authors, and it's considered their best work. Take that for what it's worth. Come and join us on the Discord. But yes, Wolfe often trades on these images of his childhood when working out secondary fictions, and certainly the story within story mechanisms in Peace and the story within a story mechanism here do that. It's interesting, of course, that you see a development from this to Peace, but from Peace definitely to Book of the New Sun, to do with the issues around the author's memory, I'm thinking about chiefly. So yeah, there's the layering of characters with this story he's reading, which is inspired by the pulps that Gene Wolfe read himself, and which I've read on this channel. I've read a Conan story, but there's the question of what's really going on. Is he actually guided by is it Dr. Death? Who is it takes him to his mother? Who takes him to his mother? How have I managed to forget it in the last 10 minutes? Dr. Death, yeah. So Dr. Death actually, in that sense, he's presented positively. He is a necessary part of the story at the very least. But actually, the idea that Tackman would be sad if Dr. Death and Gola die, because that maybe at some level the story is making sense of his world. Maybe at some level he associates, because of him associating Dr. Death with Dr. Black. But there's an eternal return thing. The story is always there. The story is always true and always real. The sub-creation is always present. Fingolfin is alive even though he dies fighting Morgoth, that sort of thing. But that also applies to Tackman. But is it because Tackman is himself a story, because he is himself a story, or is it a reference to the immortality of the soul? This is, for people who have not read Wolfe, this is archetypal Wolfe, I think, that you've just got so many questions and so many layers that you can quickly pick up just by reading it once or twice and thinking, wait, What are all these weird things that are happening? And you make a list and you realize Wolfe has a lot of stuff going on in this book. It's also a classically Wolfian story about his mother. Maternality is quite important in lots of Wolfe books. Not all Wolfe books, but lots of them. Certainly Book of the New Sun, to a lesser degree Wizard Knight. Not really so much Peace. Book of the Long Sun, certainly maternity of various kinds is quite important. But yeah, I think there's a lot to chew on there, and I think if you like the fact there's a lot to chew on there, I would go and read some Gene Wolfe. I'd start with short stories perhaps rather than a novel, or perhaps Fifth Head of Cerberus if you are going for a novel. But understand that a big part of the joy of Wolfe is that you leave a story with, including an ending which in some ways is quite clear. I think to say is it's very clear that in the primary reality of the story, Takvin's mother takes an overdose of some kind, is taken to hospital, survives. He has to go and live in a boys' home. What does that mean? That's a weird, confusing thing, to be fair. But what resolves is fairly clear. But what it means and how we get there, did Dr. Death actually take him? Who is Dr. Death in this? It's not Dr. Black in the secondary reality, in the primary reality, sorry. It's presumably not Jason. Is it another person, or is it actually Dr. Death? Given that with Ransom, it's actually a guy coming out of a raft on the beach who is tanned and not cold in the middle of winter or whatever, on the late autumn or whatever it is. Perhaps there really is something where the secondary reality is breaking through, much perhaps like we can experience in shadowy ways that books can breaking through into our reality. I think there is a really strong sense of the strength of subcreation. Yep, so Matthew says, I sometimes think that Wolfe believes the world is something like a fiction. There's certainly stuff, Wolfe, understanding that Wolfe, it probably helps to think that Wolfe likes Tolkien a lot. Tolkien teaches him how to write moral fiction in Wolfe's own view, I think, and gives him a picture of what Wolfe believes much later, around the turn of the millennium, believed to be a true picture of political and social reality. It leads him in that direction. And also Wolfe does during the 70s, though he later kind of says he's chilled out a bit, in the 70s and perhaps 80s, Wolfe later will see himself as he's very, very theologically engaged in terms of study, in terms of thinking about stuff. And I wonder whether it might be helpful to look at, and sorry for the people who are going to be alienated by the deep dive, but by your Thomas Aquinas, by your John Duns Scotuses, whether or not there's something about the creation of the world and the way in which the world is potential being actualized by God creating it, who is it? It is, in that sense, a sort of fiction. And it's a fiction that exists because God wants it to, not because it's inherently better than anything else, but just because of the creative impulses of God. Things like that. I wonder whether there are things in his head, given we know how widely he read. I think we definitely know he read Thomas. I wonder whether or not there's something there to take away and think when he depicts the fictional worlds, he's partly influenced by Tolkien and subcreation theory, but also influenced by scholasticism. And by the way, that sees worlds as contingent. I think, that's probably important. Matthew says also in Peace, there's the forger creating books who seems to have interesting ideas about the firmness of reality. Yes, I think there is an Alzabo soup thing going on, let's say, with Peace as well. The idea of whose stories even are the stories we're engaging with, both explicitly and implicitly. We hear stories within stories. We meet a forger who talks about forging stories that no one knows anything about, which is really just him showing his creative excellence. They think it's by this famous author, but it's not. It's just made up. But also even the primary story. What story is it? What story are we hearing when we hear stuff? Yeah. Gold, as in, is that book chapter 4 of Peace, chapter 3 of Peace? Do you mean that? I think that is the one, yeah. The forger is, yeah. So that's very much why Wolfe is fun. The prose itself is really lovely. Often, it's not always. Basically, this is not his peak prose. Think like a Peace is at points so stunning. But he's able to capture different voices well. There's a little boy's voice, there's the pulp voice, and the little boy's voice recurs as a device he uses in Wizard Knight, where there is a little boy who grows older and bigger, but is still a little boy. What on earth is going on with that in Dr. Ransom? Captain Ransom, sorry. Again, weird question, don't know how to answer it. But he captures voice well. When he's writing the pulp action, he writes action well whenever he wants to in anything. And certainly Book of the New Sun is influenced by pulp as well, definitely. Anyway, yeah, let's... La Befana is 5 pages, is it? I think 5 pages. In fact, it's less, it's 4 pages, really. I will read La Befana, which is a very different kind of story, but very interesting. Matthew, you have read it, I think, haven't you? So, gather your thoughts about it whilst I'm reading, I guess. Obviously, people on the catch-up, drop up thoughts and ideas in the comments. Get text in front of you. That might be a useful thing if you're able to plan for a listen back, is get the text in front of you. La Befana. When Zoz, home from the pit, had licked his fur clean, he howled before John Bananas' door. John's wife, Teresa, opened it and let him in. She was a thin, stooped woman of 30 or 35, her black hair shot with grey. She did not smile, but he felt somehow she was glad to see him. She said, "He's not home yet. If you want to come in, we've got a fire." Zoz said, "I'll wait for him," and six-legging politely across the threshold, sat down over the stone Bananas had rolled in with him when they had had caps on squares scratched on the floor dirt, said, "Hi, Mr. Zoz." And Zoz said hi in return. Skipped a line. Zoz said, "I'll wait for him," and six-legging politely across the threshold, sat down over the stone Bananas had rolled in with him when they had been new friends. Marie and Mark, playing some sort of game with bottle caps on squares scratched on the floor dirt, said, "Hi, Mr. Zoz," and Zoz said hi in return. Banana's old mother, whom Zoz had brought here from the pads in his rusty power wagon the day before, looked at him from piercing eyes, then fled into the other room. She could hear Teresa relax, hear her wheezing out puffed breath. He said, "I think she thinks I bumped her on purpose yesterday. She's not used to you yet." "I know," Zoz said. "I told her, Mother Bananas, it's their world and they're not used to you." "Sure," Zoz said. A gust of wind outside brought the cold in to replace the odour of the gog hutch on the other side of the left wall. "I tell you, it's hell to have your husband's mother with you in a place as small as this." "Sure," Zoz said again. Maria announced, "Daddy's home." The door rattled open and Bananas came in, looking tired and cheerful. Bananas worked in the slaughtering market, and though his cheeks were blue with cold, his 2 trouser cuffs were red with blood. He kissed Teresa and toused the hair of both children and said, "Hi, Zozzy." Zoz said, "Hi, how does it roll?" and moved over so Bananas could warm his back. Someone groaned and Bananas asked a little anxiously, "What's that?" Teresa said, "Next door." "Huh?" "Next door, some woman." "Oh, I thought it might be Mom." "She's fine." "Where is she?" "In back." Bananas frowned. "There's no fire in there. She'll freeze to death." "I didn't tell her to go back there. She can wrap a blanket around herself." Zoz said, "It's me. I bother her." He got up. Banana said, "Sit down." "I can go. I just came by to say hi." "Sit down." Bananas turned to his wife. "Honey, you shouldn't leave her in there alone. See if you can't get her to come out, okay?" "Johnny." "Teresa, damn it." "Okay, Johnny." Bananas took off his coat and sat down in front of the fire. Maria and Mark had gone back to their game. In a voice too low to attract their attention, Bananas said, "Nice thing, huh?" Zoz said, "I think your mother makes her nervous." Banana said, "Sure." Zoz said, "This isn't an easy world." "For us two-leggers, no, it ain't. But you don't see me moving." Zoz said, "That's good. I mean, here you got a job anyway. There's work." "That's right." Unexpectedly, Maria said, "We get enough to eat here, and me and Mark can find wood for the fire. Where we used to be, there wasn't anything to eat." Bananas asked, "You remember, honey?" "A little." Zoz said, "People are poor here." Bananas was taking off his shoes, scraping the street mud from them and tossing it into the fire. He said, "If you mean us people are poor every place." He jerked his head in the direction of the back room. "You ought to hear her tell about our world." "Your mother?" Bananas nodded. "You should hear what she has to say." Maria said, "Daddy, how did grandmother get here?" "Same way we did." Mark said, "You mean she signed a thing?" "A labour contract?" "No, she's too old. She bought a ticket, like you'd buy something in a store." Maria said, "Why did she come, Daddy?" "Shut up and play. Don't bother us." Zoz said, "How did things go at work?" So. Bananas looked toward the back room again. "She came into some money, but that's her business. I never asked her anything about it." "Sure. She says she spent every dollar to get here. They haven't used dollars even on Earth for 50, 60 years, but she still says it. How'd you like that?" She laughed, and Zoz laughed too. "Well, that's how she was going to get back, and she said she's not going back. She's going to die right here with us. What can I possibly answer?" "I don't know." Zoz waited for Banana to say something, and when he did not, added, "I mean, she is your mother after all." "Yeah." Through the thin wall, they heard the sick woman groan again and someone moving about. Zoz said, "I guess it's been a long time since you saw her last." "Yeah, 22 years Newtonian. Look, listen, Zozzy." "Uh-huh. You know something? I wish I'd never set eyes on her again." Zoz said something, nothing, rubbing his hands. "That sounds lousy, I guess." I know what you mean." "She could have lived a good for the rest of her life on what that ticket cost her." Bananas was silent for a moment. "She used to be a big fat woman when I was a kid, a great big woman with a loud voice. Look at her now, dried up and bent over. It's like she wasn't my mother at all. The only thing the same about her? The black dress. That's the only thing I recognize, the only thing that hasn't changed. She could be a stranger. She tells stories about me I don't remember at all." Maria said, "She told us the story today." Mark added, "Before you came home, about the witch." Maria said, "That brings the presents to people, to children. Her name is La Befana, the Christmas witch." Zoz drew his lips back from his double canines and jiggled his head. "I like stories." "She says it's almost Christmas, and on Christmas 3 wise men went looking for the baby, and they stopped at the old witch's door, and they asked which way it was, and she told them, and they said, 'Come with us.'" The door to the other room opened, and Teresa and Banana's mother came out. Banana's mother was holding a tea kettle. She edged around Zoz to put it on the hook and swing it out over the fire. "And she is sweeping, and she wouldn't come," Maria resumed. Mark added, "Said she'd come when she'd finished. She was a real old, real ugly woman. Watch, I'll show you how she walked." He jumped up and began to hobble around the room. Bananas looked at his wife and indicated the wall. "What's this?" "Some woman, I told you. In there, the charity place. They said she could stay there. She couldn't stay in the house because all the rooms are full of men." Maria was saying, "So when she was all done, she went looking for him, only she couldn't find him, and she never did." "She's sick?" "She's knocked up, Johnny, that's all. Don't worry about her. She's got some guy in there with her." Mark asked, "Do you know about the baby Jesus, Uncle Zoz?" Zoz groped for words. Johnny, my son." "Yes, Mama. Your friend. Do they have the faith here, Johnny?" Apropos of nothing, Teresa said, "They're Jews next door." Zoz told Mark, "You see, the baby Jesus has never come to my world," Mark said, "and so she goes all over every place looking for him with her presents, and she leaves some with every kid she finds, but she says it's not because she thinks they might be him, like some people think, but just a substitute. She can't never die. She has to do it forever, doesn't she, Grandma?" The bent old woman said, "Not forever, dearest, only until tomorrow night." The end. Wolf's short stories can be less interesting for me because though he is a good writer, so stylistically it's fine, it's nice to listen to or read. His strength is depth, it's density, it's the ability to kind of have different things running, different tracks running. The production is very high production values, and so in the very short stuff, I think that can disappear a bit. It's easy to read, it's pleasant to read, but you forget it. This one, I think, for a short story, for 4-ish pages, is actually really quite interesting. I think it is good. I enjoyed reading it. Enjoyed reading it again there, but I think it's interesting because you have a sci-fi element. You have like a weird alien guy hanging around, who is his friend, apparently, the Johnny Banana's friend. I think Johnny Banana's an interesting name, because I think what I was reading, basically there was a mob boss called it, but it's not a particularly, like, it's not clear where the name comes from. Maybe if anyone knows, they can stick it in the comments or whatever. But yeah, this idea that you've got humans who are so poor they have to go and sit on a freezing cold alien land, and they're befriending each other, and Zoz comes over and hangs out, and he seems to like being there. He's not unpleasant to people. John and Teresa like him. Teresa's happy to see him. John's given him a stone to hang out on. John shares how he feels about his mother. Yeah, Matthew says some of those paragraphs are doing so much work, characterization, exposition, very dense. Yes, I think it's the difference between this and some of the less interesting, very short stories is that these are Wolfe paragraphs at a very, very high degree of Wolfe paragraphs. They're not kind of simply, oh, there's a clue in there. You're like, oh, actually, often 2 sentences are carrying the work of several Robin Hood pages. This thing I forgot to say in my reading update, I did read another several hundred pages of Mad Ship this past month, and I will finish it in the next day or two. But if you want to look at someone who's economic versus someone who is wasteful with words, both of whom are good authors. Wolfe is an all-time great author. Hobb is a pleasant author. But look at those two, and I think you see that Wolfe simply packs everything. Yeah, they are work buddies, and yeah, it's, as a domestic scene, that's one level at which it works. This is the Wolfe thing, is that usually there is a plain reading, call it the literal sense of scripture, where you just read it and you're like, okay, so what's happened is an alien comes over to see his mate, and his buddy gets home. But it's plain the mother-in-law is kind of a problem. They're really poor, but the alien actually seems quite nice. And you can read this different ways in different stories. I'm thinking about Peace again is an obvious one, where what relationship Alden has with people is up for grabs. But I think you certainly see there's something there that this is just a scene you can enjoy. But yeah, but there is also what the ploughman sees, indeed. But there's also something else going on. There is a ploughman's vision as well here of, and it's mostly highlighted. The single most obvious thing, that there's a couple of very obvious things, but it's very obviously at least partly to do with this thing where he suddenly says, she could not be my mother. She doesn't look like my mother. She doesn't tell stories about me when I was young. She's nothing like my mother, but they wear the same black dress. And I think that gives the game away intentionally. It's a very Wolfe he'll give you a surface level, which is potentially quite fun. Lots of people read Book of the New Sun functioning at that level, and Book of the New Sun is a weird book to read like that, but it's got so much creativity and wonder and world building and even action in it that people read it like that. But Wolfe also will often just give such an obvious giveaway line, such as Severian within 2 chapters saying, "My memory is perfect," to "I think I'm mad," to openly not remembering something. It is very obvious that something's going on with Severian within the first 10 pages or so of Shadow of the Torturer. And here, the fact that you're told there's this woman who's turned up, it's a bit weird she's turned up, but a big takeaway is that she's not actually anything like John Banana's mother. That's important. But then the thing that is being tracked alongside that is that the kids are repeating to Zoz a story of La Befana, the Christmas witch, who goes around giving presents to kids and is the wise woman who should have been at the nativity but was not. Should have been there at Epiphany. Apparently, La Befana probably coming from it being a mutation of a word to do with epiphania, the epiphany. So yeah, and suddenly you have this thing where the weird thing about a Jewish woman giving birth next door suddenly begins to take on in not in a normal place to give birth, just needing shelter. There are men in all the other rooms. She has to be in a random room. You get this thing about then you've got the dog hutch, which smells presumably a domestic animal thing. You suddenly have this picture of like, oh, there's a weird thing going on next door, and that is important in some way. And then you have the discussion where Mother, let's call her Mother Bananas, is trying to wants to find out. Mark says, "Do you know about the baby Jesus, Uncle Zoz?" Zoz is great for words. Johnny, my son. Yes, Mama. Your friend. Do they have the faith here? And then Teresa says they are Jews next door. This is a moment where, like, you've already got the kind of the masks of Wolfe, which are in the 300-page book, are many and dense. Here they are there, but they're suddenly all peeling off. Something strange is happening here, or probably happening here, to do with a woman who may not be John Bananas' mother at all, but is here next to this place, wanting to know if the aliens have the faith, telling stories about Christmas witches. I think it's very plainly in No Rooms at the Inn parallel, isn't it? Suddenly you have this, and the final line being this thing where Mother Bananas seems to say she's about to die, or she'll have to do this forever, won't she? And Grandma says no, only till tonight or whatever it is. So it seemed, and suddenly you're like, okay, is this woman actually a Christmas witch who's come to this planet because there's some sort of weird second coming, but really a sort of second nativity rather than a second coming, to attend, so that, which will mean that she no longer has to go around doing this. But suddenly the fact that you're then like, okay, so the Jewish girl, presumably she's human rather than alien, but so is this baby actually going to be Jesus? Is it, what's going on? Is it a Messiah? Is it going to be a Messiah to Zoz's people? Presumably not. That doesn't really work. But like, there's a thing where Wolfe doesn't resolve those things, and that's very typically Wolfian. That there are things that are resolved, but he thinks that you as the reader can do the work to work, not because he doesn't give an ending, but rather because he says, look, here's all the stuff you need to know. You can do the rest. That's more fun. It's more interesting to do it allusively. I really enjoyed La Befana. I think in terms of the Wolfe is very often at his most powerful when dipping into the mystical. The end of Wizard is a good example. The anteroom, I think it is. I'm thinking about the anteroom it might be in Sword of the Lictor. Correct me if I'm misremembering the time and place, but where you have this profoundly human scene in the midst of this very anti-human experience, often in Book of the New Sun. Earth of the New Sun has some similar moments too, but you fairly regularly get these moments where, at the very start of Book of the Long Sun, with Silk's vision of the outsider, these strange moments of maybe they are theophany, they are divine a divine breach of the subfiction. Matthew's already said about the idea, does Wolfe see our world as a sort of fiction? What if you have this kind of divine breach of the subfiction as well, the subcreation? That's Wolfe often at his best, and La Befana, it has some Wolfian mysteries going on, as Wolfe at his best does, but also it has this quite profound thing that starts to happen that it's not even clear what's really happening, but something plainly is happening, and that thing is special and important. Yeah, I think if Johnny Bananas, even if it is a reference of all things like the mafia boss Johnny Bananas or whoever, is obviously meant to be a joke. It's something where, now I'd say John, Teresa, Mark, Maria, his family are very Roman Catholic. By that, both are Italian, so John Bananas fits into that kind of Cosa Nostra thing, but also the names are kind of archetypally Latinized saints' names, aren't they? Including the spelling, which is less obvious when I read it. But yeah, Zoz, the fact the alien, and the alien is the alien there in some Wolf stories. Alien presences actually get quite sinister in ways that are very, very low key, and you don't automatically guess. Here, Zoz just seems like a nice guy who's kind of wants, maybe it's a bit awkward he should leave because the thing with the mother-in-law. But then there's similarly a thing where he's like, I don't really know about this Jesus stuff. I'm just an alien guy from the plant. I'm from the meatpacking plant, or whatever it is. But actually, maybe there's something else more going on there with Zoz. In that sense, it is a it's actually, I generally go for, call them positive readings of Wolfe, because I think even in the books that have sometimes, in a way, some of the darkest themes, like something like peace, are often open to redemption, open to redemptive stories, and a redemptive conclusion beyond the page of the book. And I think here I definitely feel like that's there, that there is a genuine friendship between John and Zoz, and that there's something marvelous potentially happening for Zoz, even if we cannot understand it. Yes, I do recommend Wolfe. I've got 3 of his short story collections. I think I've got this one on Dr. Death and Other Stories. I've got Endangered Species, and I've got Innocents Abroad, which are Innocents Abroad. I also have Cast of Days, whatever it's called, which is the collection of his essays. Most of them are essays rather than stories, about writing generally. And I think he is a very strong short story writer. I don't know, some people would recommend these even more than I do. I think, like I say, they're a perfectly good introduction. If you're thinking, what's some digestible Wolfe, go for this. But I'm glad that Bradbury was a brilliant short story writer, maybe a top 10 ever in the genre fiction SFF kind of area. Or rather, almost certainly top 10 in the SFF, and probably top 3. But Bradbury struggles to hold the form over a longer period of time and words. And I think something about Wolfe is that these stories are fun, but they are a taster. They are, if you like, they are the Great Courses. Highly recommend the Great Courses. Try Natural Law with Joseph Koterski, or Greenberg's music appreciation ones. But yeah, the Great Courses will often have like a 5 or 10 minute taster video from a 30 or 40-minute lecture on YouTube or something like that, just so you can be like, oh man, this is fun. And in a way, it feels like the short stories are an informal taster, because they're saying, oh, by the way, imagine if this guy had 400 pages to do this, and then suddenly you go, or 300 pages, very typically for him, and he's writing the most profound fiction of the latter half of the 20th century. He's writing really very, very powerful spiritual and existential tales that are amazingly creative, beautifully written, but deeply profound. And I think that the short stories I've read today, I think both hint at that ability of Wolfe's to do that. And I hope if you're not familiar with him, you are more interested in him now. Let's wrap this up. It's an hour and 20. We've had a good time. Thanks, Matthew, for joining me live, and anyone else who did drop in. And hopefully people enjoy this on the listen back, and do drop your comments, your thoughts about the stories. If you would like to come and join our buddy read on The Doomed City by the Strugatskys, get in touch on that as well. And yes, I think be reading Tolkien. I'll read maybe Leaf by Niggle or Smith of Wootton Major or something like that at the end of this month as the next reading room. And I'm thinking Lovecraft after that. The Lovecraft, it's hard to find stories of the right length because of just, but there are definitely stories that can take 40 minutes to read. You're welcome, Matthew. Thanks for listening. I'm going to end the broadcast. I will see you next time.